All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcoming Kelly Klein to the podcast. Kelly, thank you for your time.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so just wanted to start off. We know that you actually were a theater major in college. What were some of your most memorable productions or like a favorite role that you played?
So I was actually specifically a musical theater performance major in college. I also completed a musical theater certificate program when I was in high school. That was through University of Cincinnati's College Conservatory of Music. So I was also studying a lot of acting. I completed the musical theater certificate program during high school, and then I took some acting and everything as well. So some of my favorite roles, one of my number one is called Anything Goes. It's a musical by Cole Porter, and I got to play one of the female leads, in my opinion, the more fun female lead, because I got to do a lot of tap dancing, a lot of singing. I got to do some comedy, and it was just really a lot of fun for me. So that's, and actually that was a role I was actually in that particular show 3 different times. And the first time I was in it, I think I was just, when I was younger, I was maybe just, I'm trying to remember, I think I was in the ensemble and maybe with like a little breakout line or something or another. And then the second time I was in it, I was one of the featured kind of dance roles, which were the angels, who backed up the lead female, Reno. And that character, Reno, was something that I aspired. It was one of my favorite shows and one of my favorite characters. I always wanted to get an opportunity to play that character. And because of the way the show's written, she's written generally for an older woman, not really old, but more. I basically never thought I would have a chance to play that role until I was in my 30s. And I went and I auditioned for this show, a third production, thinking, really at the time thinking I was going to maybe be cast as one of the younger female characters, and they offered me the role of Reno and kind of worked it out to where I could play the role a little bit younger than it was originally written and played. So I was shocked and excited because I just, had assumed I would never get a chance to even touch that role for a long time. So that was really cool. And I mean, obviously, I performed in that show 3 different times, so I clearly loved it. But a couple of other favorite roles were actually more dramatic acting roles. One was in a show called Youve, and it was really, really dramatic and intense. It was, as the title mentions, it's basically about young people in juvenile detention, and they're telling their stories. And in telling these stories, they're kind of reliving and acting out the scenarios. So my character had this really intense kind of story where she had been trying to rob a house, and the owner returned, and it was this older man, and she was trying to hide and trying to get away, and she ended up really hurting him badly. And then she also was on drugs, which I had no, reference. So I had to do some research to figure that out. And at the end of the show, it just closed with basically me like going through withdrawal symptoms, kind of like it's like a dark theater in the spotlight. So that was really, really emotional and intense, and one of my favorite roles just to really dig into because it was so different and really challenging. And then another favorite is a show called JB that is based on the book of Job from the Bible, and my role was as one of the messengers. So I was an angel, but the way the show is written is I come in all these different forms. So it was so cool because I got to, throughout this one show, I got to play all of these different characters that I appeared as. And that show was actually written for a mostly male cast, and some of my characters were played as male. And so that was really interesting, just throughout that one show, finding the different mannerisms for each of these characters and figuring out how each of them talked and how each of them moved and carried themselves. And, because I couldn't just show up as the same person, and I had to really be able to present to the audience who would see me, basically looking the same every time, but they had to know that I was somebody different. So it was just really, as far as an actor, it was a lot of fun challenges for me, and I got to really kind of explore some different techniques and everything, and do a lot of the legwork and the just the grunt work that goes into it, and that's, to me, kind of, well, I'm sure we'll get to this when we talk more about wrestling, but that's something that I love. I love doing the work, and I love the journey, and it's almost the process is a huge thing to me, sometimes more than the result. So, sometimes it's almost more fun just to be working toward my goals than necessarily meeting the goal itself. While that's great, it's the thing that where the meat of it is just that journey and that process of getting there.
Do you miss the musical aspect of performing now that you're wrestling and your character doesn't really lend itself to singing in the ring?
I actually am able to find other outlets for music, and right now I'm completing my degree for vocal music education. So I'm currently preparing for my senior vocal recital, as well as studying guitar. And, so that's something where I'm getting to kind of get that outlet. And then when I'm not doing that, I've done things like done some professional work as like a section leader, a vocal section leader at churches. I've done just private individual kind of gigs. I've done some work with like high school students and choirs, and kind of like helps them with movement and singing and things like that. So I'm able to sort of find that elsewhere. It's definitely still a huge part of my life and always will be.
Have you ever gone to one of these functions and had like one of the kids recognize you at the school as being Kelly Klein from Women of Honor?
I haven't yet, because actually the group that I've been doing a lot of work with sort of knew me before Women of Honor kind of started catching steam. So that maybe that'll happen. But I've had some things recently where people have said like, oh, you were at my kid's such and such, or things like that, or so I am starting to have that where some people know me from wrestling and then will cross paths with me or see something where another part of my life, I guess, has intersected with theirs. So that's kind of neat.
That's cool. And so how did you get into wrestling in the first place?
The way that I got into wrestling, because I didn't grow up watching it, I have this really early memory of, now I didn't grow up with cable, so this was whenever it was like on Sunday mornings on just public access, and my mom must have been getting my little sister ready to go to church, so my little sister was pretty young. So I remember at least my dad and I were sitting, waiting, and we were watching wrestling was on. And I remember my mom coming into the room and saying she didn't want us watching that. She didn't want her kids. She didn't want the kids watching it. So that was the last time I ever remember seeing it, other than when there would just be commercials for like monster truck rallies and wrestling events at Hero Arena, you know, in the area, stuff like that. So I would see those commercials, and you see, I remember, you know, like the Ultimate Warrior's face popping up on the screen, but that I didn't see any of it. I didn't know anything about it. So when I was working around Cincinnati, I was part of a rock band, and I was also waitressing, so I invited people I worked with to come see my band, and one of the other servers said, well, I'll come see your band if you get your band to come see me wrestle. And I thought, okay, what the heck, this sounds interesting, and, you know, it wasn't real far from where I lived. It was, you know, something I got my guitarist and another friend of mine, you know, to go to this show. And I just remember the very first time I ever went that I knew I wanted to do it. I never had a moment where I wanted to come back as a fan and like, oh, I want to keep coming to these shows and watching this. It was immediately, okay, how do I get into that ring? So it was definitely something immediately that I really wanted to pursue, and started sleuthing to find out where and how I could train and become part of that.
And so you didn't grow up as a fan. Did that make the experience like more difficult, or was it actually easier because you didn't have any kind of grandiose ideas?
Yeah, I think it definitely was a little bit of both, because I didn't come in enamored with the idea of wrestling or the part that you see on TV. I came into it fully aware of the work, and like I mentioned, I like the process, and I like tackling challenges and tackling big goals. So I really didn't ever come into it thinking or comparing it to anything I'd seen on TV, because I hadn't really seen anything on TV to have any concept of the greater stage available. I just saw this independent wrestling show at Heartland Wrestling Association and thought, I just want to be doing that. It was just all about the doing of it. So that was definitely helpful, and I didn't have any kind of like preconceived ideas. Something that was challenging was I had to catch up on the history, and I did that actually, I think, fairly well. I had to go back and watch DVDs and borrow tapes and DVDs from different people, go to used bookstores and see what I could pick up there to watch. So and then, like getting a hold of books and different things that I could read that kind of gave me an idea of different people and the history. So it was definitely me sort of playing catch up, because there were people that I wouldn't know who they were or their significance. And sometimes, people just expect you to know, not realizing that, hey, I'm still trying to learn all of this, and I didn't grow up around it or grow up as a fan. So I'm not aware of it. So I think there were some times when people maybe kind of had negative opinions because I didn't know things, just not realizing that I was learning and I was in the process of learning as much as I could. And I did do the work. I didn't just think, oh, well, whatever, I'll figure it out. I mean, I really did seek out as much as I could. Now I think that in a way I have more knowledge and understanding of some of the history than even some of my peers maybe do, because I really wanted to go back and see what I missed.
That makes sense. Like you don't have memories of a match you watched 15 years ago. You maybe watched in the last couple of years, so it's a lot more fresh in your mind.
Yeah, and I also went back further than anything I would have just seen as a fan. So I was going back to things that happened before I was born, where someone who maybe just gained most of their knowledge through being a fan is only going to know really what went on in their lifetime, and maybe not know like the backstory and the business aspect and how different things impacted the next thing in history and how everything was interrelated. So I studied it more in that way, and I still try to do that. And I think that is definitely beneficial, so that maybe I can recognize how things now might impact the future, and that's just not something that you're going to get from just watching purely as a fan.
So when you were training, you trained with Les Thatcher and Jimmy Yang. Did they give you, were they some of the people who were asking you to go back and study more?
They always were, offering me ideas and suggestions, and I even now I'll go and I'll watch old wrestling tapes with Les. So that's really great, because it wasn't that he was ever saying, oh, you need to go back and study this, but he would have the resources and would he knows what matches, and he can say, hey, let's watch this match, or let's watch this show. And then I can sit there and listen to somebody who in many of these cases was actually there or helped orchestrate or facilitate something, give me the background on it that, a lot of people wouldn't have access to.
What would you say the most important, some of the most important lessons you've learned while training with them?
Les is, I think, well known for using the L word, logic.
Yes.
And that's, I think, one of the first things that comes to mind is no matter what somebody's preferences or style is, it has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then there's something wrong. Something Les has also been really helpful with is understanding the evolution of wrestling. So he can, while he has his preferences on a lot of things, he does recognize that things change, but he also is a really good resource for some of the things that have changed but maybe shouldn't have, or some things from history that are valuable and maybe need to be reignited. And I've gotten some really good instruction with him where there are things that I know have caught people's eye, and they're just things where he really focuses on doing things right and having a really good solid foundation, so that no matter what other acrobatics you're doing, that stuff doesn't matter if somebody doesn't believe what you're doing. And I think that's probably the best way to put it, is he's really really good about teaching and focusing on believability. And then I also love how he kind of helps break things down mentally, where there will be certain things that he's pointed out where, okay, somebody might want to do such and such and it looks cool and they like it, but they don't necessarily pay attention to the context that somebody else would have done that. So understanding that big picture and finding out, okay, why did this work and why was it used the way it was used, as far as, something creative, just, again, logic and making it work correctly so that you're not just doing something because it looks cool. So he's just always been great on just really I guess the best way to put it is the mental side. There were times where I left training and I was just so mentally exhausted because he just has so much to teach and would just really break things down and make you think about it. So I love just getting to talk to him and hearing kind of his thoughts and discussing different things. And sometimes I'll have specific questions that I'll ask him, okay, what do you think about this? And I definitely, there were times where I left practice and training physically exhausted, and there were times where I left completely with my brain fried, and sometimes both. So he covered those bases.
A lot of the nuance from your acting, especially with that show where you were playing multiple roles, really lends itself to being in the ring and the nuance and the logic of drawing the crowd in during your match.
Definitely. And I think that one of the, I guess one of my favorite things to do with wrestling is to use techniques I'm aware of from literature and from theater. And I think that a lot of the best wrestlers are people that don't eat, sleep, and breathe just wrestling, because if you think about it, then eventually you're just going to keep sort of regurgitating the same things. But if you're somebody who is able to pull influences from music, from pop culture, from history, from mythology, from literature, all of these kinds of things, from even maybe other athletics, that's when you're going to be able to sort of evolve into something different. But if it's just you keep kind of repeating the same things, and then somebody's seeing that, and you're just, it's almost like, I don't know the best way to put it. It's like, just like this, I think of when you're like breeding dogs and you're trying to purify a line, and eventually you just get, it really screws it up, you know. You're limited because you only get the same traits eventually. And I think that's definitely a drawback when you're trying to just kind of do the same thing over and over. Then it's not going to have the same kind of value and power.
It's really interesting, and this is all stuff that we are able to see now as you're participating in Women of Honor. How has becoming a staple in Women of Honor changed your life?
Well, it's still it's kind of hard to say. I'm still so, I guess, into the process and the journey of it. It's only been just over a year since Women of Honor relaunched, and I'm still trying to really be part of kind of it, picking up momentum and picking up steam and catching traction, and we're doing that, but I don't see it as we've arrived necessarily. I see it as we've been putting in the work, and we've still got a lot of work to do. So I guess in a way I'm almost more distracted by, okay, what's the next step? What's the next goal? And that's really kind of where my head is at. I do think that in a way, it's motivated and encouraged me, because I have achieved things in wrestling that I never necessarily thought that I would. So now that I'm starting to kind of break past barriers that other people had set for me and some that I had set for myself, I'm just, I guess, seeing this kind of just huge array of opportunities that are in front of me now that I probably wasn't even aware of before. So to me, this is just fuel to keep getting better and better, and to keep pushing harder and working harder.
Well, tied into goals, recently Ring of Honor made an announcement that they were going to unveil a new title, and there was a lot of chatter on the internet and a lot of support for Women of Honor getting a championship. And it ended up coming out that it was actually a 6-man tag title. How did that impact the goals you set when you guys you ladies don't have a championship in the division?
I think that in a way a title could potentially give people more focus. But for me, because I have an undefeated streak, I have something sort of almost tangible to focus on. So I think that in some ways, okay, if I've got this match and it's for the title, I think that might actually mean more for some of the other women than it does for me right now, because to me, every match is a title match, in that this match I'm either going to be undefeated or that's going to be over. Speaking
of your undefeated streak, you have a bit of a mean streak when you're taking on the other women? And you've been working with BJ Whitmer. He's been bringing you down to the ring. How has, BJ works as an incredible heel that can get most crowds to turn on him pretty quickly. How has working with him impacted your career? And has he given you any insights that have helped you develop?
He has definitely helped give me a lot of focus. And I think really when I talked about kind of maybe the confidence or the awareness of some of the opportunities that I might have, he's been one of the people that has been able to kind of open my eyes to some of that. There were, like when I mentioned barriers that other people set, for women, age is a barrier that we all hear about, and at different times, different people hear, well, right now WWE is only hiring people this age or that age, and I think it affects women a lot more than it does the men. So that was something where for a long time I had just heard these numbers over and over, and you just kind of think, well, if I don't make it by whenever, then I'm not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of that, there's the fact that we didn't have a lot of options as women years ago. And for some women, it was almost like there were no options, because if you're watching wrestling and you're looking at where the money is, and the only place that, so to speak, the money is WWE, but they're doing only certain things with the women, if you don't want to do that or be that, then that eliminates that final option. So then things happened, like the TNA Knockouts division started, mm-hmm. and Shimmer started picking up steam, and then there was Shine, and there was WSU, and then there's Soraya Knight has Bellatrix in Europe, and there are these great women's promotions in Japan and Mexico, and that all continued to sort of grow and expand, and not only that, but be taken more seriously as the women started to just really show what they could do. And it wasn't that the women weren't capable, it was that they didn't necessarily have a platform to show that. So once people really start seeing this, then we become taken more seriously. As we're taken more seriously, more opportunities open up, and it's just kind of this cycle where we can keep building and growing and catching this momentum. So he was, as far as BJ is concerned, he was somebody that, really was able to kind of push me and help me as an athlete and a performer work toward my potential. And when I was training with Les and BJ, they really didn't train me as a woman, and there are some places where the training is different for women, and I don't really think that it should be. I think that you should be trained as a wrestler and an athlete, and that's what I was able to participate in with my training, where it wasn't, well, you should do this move because it's cool when girls do this move. That wasn't ever, it was like, okay, well, are you an athlete and are you competing to win the match? How do you win the match? So, I was able to be part of that and have that type of training that just could push me as a performer and a competitor and hold me to the standards that frankly I want to be held to, and I want to be going after that level of performance. And I know that there are so many women out there right now that are all trying to do that and really pushing and trying to have the best matches on the show, no matter who's there, and trying to outdo the men. And sometimes we can give a lot of the guys a run for their money because we are training and performing and working as hard, if not harder, than some of our male counterparts are.
You've mentioned in other interviews that, and that you said just now that you want to be known as a wrestler, not a female wrestler. Have you, and, talking about how you guys sometimes work harder than the guys do on the card, have you ever been in an intergender match, or maybe even in practice, sparred with any of your male counterparts?
In practice, it was basically always working with male wrestlers, and it was interesting because there were definitely times where, you know, I was pushing the guys, and I think some of them would even say, you know, they kind of had to keep up with me. But part of the reason for that is I'm naturally super competitive. That's just who I am. That's my family, and it doesn't matter. This is actually a story about my older sister, just to give you an idea. When we were in elementary school, we had to do the president's physical fitness test, and there were different categories for boys and girls for some of the things, including push-ups. Mm-hmm. And the girls would have to do, I think, like 20 girl push-ups, where the guys would have to hold an isometric push-up. Mm-hmm. And my older sister went in, and my parents fully supported her, where she said, no, I want to do the isometric push-ups. Mm-hmm. So not only did she, and I think she may have done whatever the girls push-up thing was too, she beat every boy in the school, not just her class, every boy in the school. And now the part where there was like a little bit of a fight was the teacher did not list her at all in either category because she didn't compete. I think she must have only done the isometric push-up. So she didn't get listed on the girls because she didn't compete with them. And she didn't get listed on the boys list because she wasn't a boy. So she beat everybody in the school and didn't get listed. And then after that whole fiasco, I was not even allowed to do the isometric push-ups, even though I practiced with my dad and I was ready and I could do it. The teacher didn't even allow it after that. But that's just something where the way I was raised and the way my family is, even though my sister didn't get public credit for what she had done, we knew and she knew, and she knew that she could do better than what was being asked, and she held herself to a higher standard. And it became, you know, kind of a competition with herself, and that's how I am. Is it's a competition with myself. So I'm always going to be pushing myself harder and trying to do better. And as a woman in wrestling, we also have the obstacle to where we have to just get people to take us seriously in the first place before mm-hmm. they'll even basically watch us and give us a chance. So that's why I say a lot of the women, and I think a lot of women you talk to can tell you the same thing. We have to do even better just to get somebody to pay attention, to get them to take us seriously. When two guys come out to have a match, people accept that, okay, we're going to watch this wrestling match. These guys are going to come out and have a match. When two women come out, that's when, in a lot of places, in a lot of audiences, you'll hear them start saying negative things or yelling the cat fight stuff or hooting and hollering. And I know that wrestling's an aesthetic business. It is for the men too, but it definitely is for the women even more. Mm-hmm. But the men don't have to break past that fact in order to go out and have their match. The women often do. We have to get people to stop looking at us just as something to objectify and get them to move beyond that to watch our matches. And that's why we have to come out and really bring it, because people just put up a wall. So we have to get past that wall. They're not even, a lot of times, and this is changing. I'm not saying, you know, this is just everybody, mm-hmm. but a lot of times there's that wall and there's that barrier. And a lot of times I call it, there's this mountain we have to climb just to get people to watch our match and take it seriously. So that's why we have got to be on point, and that's why we're all working so hard, because I've watched certain matches where I think that if a guy had the same match, it would be accepted. But if a girl does it because we're climbing that mountain, then sometimes it gets kind of trashed. And I think there's just a double standard there. So it's like, in a way, the women sometimes have to have an even better match than the guys do in order to be taken seriously. And, you know, sometimes that's how it is. And all we can do is just keep doing better until people start to realize, and not that, because like I said, people do realize, but till more people start to realize and understand what we are able to do, what we're capable of, and that we can and will do everything that the guys will do.
Do you think that your persona helps you break past that barrier or that mountain a little easier than some of your counterparts? Just because it seems like you carry yourself like, you know, like a female Brock Lesnar, with the kind of MMA style, with the strong strikes and the submissions, and just obliterating some of the opponents you faced during your undefeated streak.
I think that in some instances, yes, it does help, because the way I carry myself and I present myself does not negate or ignore the fact that we're in an aesthetic industry. And I frankly don't think that I should have to choose to be pretty or badass. That's why I choose to be both. Mm-hmm. The point being that there are some women whose persona revolves more around the aesthetics. Mm-hmm. And it is by necessity more of a focus. And that's something that they, in many cases, I think they choose that, and that's totally okay, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to do that. But because of that, it makes it harder sometimes for the audience to be able to look past that and see what else those women are bringing. And it's really kind of stupid, because the audience should be able to recognize when a girl who's got her hair and makeup done and, you know, pink and frilly lace sparkles, when she does this really cool athletic move, they should be able to recognize that it's the same move whether she's done up or not. But people get distracted. They see sparkles and in pretty colors, and they get distracted. So because I minimize without eliminating that aspect, I think that people are able to a little bit more quickly and directly get to the badass part of the pretty badass.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about wrestling?
People think it's simple, and they think of it as something for the uneducated and the lowest common denominator, and it's absolutely not. When I was talking about bringing in literature and other elements, history, if you study wrestling, or if you get to sit down and pick the brain of some of the greatest wrestlers and writers of wrestling in history, you'll find that they are very intelligent and educated, and they are bringing these different creative elements. And sometimes there are these Shakespearean stories, and that is by no means the lowest common denominator. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things, is people think of wrestling as low and base, and it's really not.
That's horribly offensive. Myself, as an English teacher during the day, you know, think just a character like Macbeth, you know, he started off as such a tragic character, and and you understand why he makes the decisions along the way, and then suddenly he's evil, and as you're going along, you don't think of him as evil completely until the very end. And there's still, you know, something to be said for that. So, I like to say, and that's an excellent example, because I was talking to someone recently, and they were asking me, if you're in wrestling, when you're a good guy or a bad guy,
how do you do that and what do you change? And I said, and I know other people have said this too, I didn't make it up myself, but it's the situation you're in. And with Macbeth, it was the situation, and it was his fatal flaw, what drove him to be that person and to become this person that he was at the end. And in wrestling, you can tell these stories where somebody has these intentions, and then along the way, they get clouded and they get blinded and distracted by what they have to do to achieve their goal. And they start to lose themselves. And that's when, out of context, you see this character and it's like, oh, he's, he or she is just this evil, horrible person. But you peel back these layers and find out why and what's the difference between this person and that person. And it's, what is their situation?
Oh, totally. I mean, like Kevin Owens, I think, is a great example where he, especially after he attacked Sami Zayn on NXT, and he talks about how he was doing it for his family. He was just trying to provide, and he was upset that, he had been there and he felt like he deserved it more. And then it became gray. And I think when a character is gray, it's far more interesting than when it's just black or white.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of times, even, again, I bringing in elements of history and literature, most villains don't think of themselves as villains. They believe that they are doing the right thing. Even Hitler, I think, believed he was doing the right thing for his country. But he is remembered as one of the most evil human beings in the history of the world.
It's all about perception. So, last question. What has been the most rewarding experience you've had since becoming a wrestler? And then also, on the flip side, what's the weirdest experience you've ever had?
I've had several really amazing, rewarding experiences, and one was very recently. I don't know if you've seen, I'm collecting funds to put together chemo care packages. And what those are is just, it's just a little gift bag with moisturizer and a couple of different items for someone going through chemotherapy, just to kind of make them a little more comfortable and just to have something nice. So I was at this event, and this lady and her husband came up to me, and they said, what are these chemo care packages? Can you tell us about that? And I explained it to them, and they said, the wife said, well, I just finished chemotherapy, and she was done, and they said, basically had just told her cancer was gone, and they wanted to contribute. And I, even now thinking about it, I got so emotional. And I think it was like just that week that she had her last treatment and had been cleared. And, it was just really cool that something I was doing had really personally affected them. And I've had a lot of people that have given me feedback on that. And then I've had other people who have just reached out to me and told me that some of the things that I've done or said have really inspired them to do better in a number of different ways. There was years ago a high school girl who said she worked harder on her homework because she saw, she just became inspired and felt like she could do better. There was a little girl who told a friend of mine, I guess she saw me come out of the entrance and said that she wanted to be like me, and my friend said, well, why? And she said, basically kind of what my whole platform is, that I was pretty, but I was also strong and could beat up the boys, basically. And my whole thing, my entire time in wrestling has been about not having to choose and not having to be one thing or the other, that you can be anything and any combination of things that you want to be, and that being strong and tough and independent doesn't mean that I can't be pretty and feminine, and vice versa, and being smart and really thoughtful and intellectual doesn't mean that you can't be athletic or you can't be funny. It's every one of those things, and they all have value, and choosing one or more of those things doesn't make you any less valuable than someone else. If somebody feels it's really important to them to be more on the feminine, nurturing side, and that's what they want, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they love, then I would never look down on them and think, well, no, but you should be out here competing and kicking butt. Like, no, that's not for them. And on the other hand, if I want to be out here kicking butt and getting dirty and, doing that whole thing, then that's my journey, and that's for me. And that, that doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong. It's just we're all different, but we don't have to choose one or the other.
Well said. All right. Well, I just wanted to, is there, by the way, a place where we can, you want to share about helping out with those care packages?
Oh, sure. I have a GoFundMe account that is gofundme.com/KKleinBeauty. And then I've also had people, if you see me at live events, I usually have a box out that people can put contributions in, or I've had people just come up to me and say, here, this is for your chemo care. And so I put all of that aside. And then, just depending on, some people have not been able to do GoFundMe and have used PayPal, which they can contact me and get in touch with me if there's a different way that they wanted to contribute. But if you follow my Twitter and my Facebook, which both of those are Kelly Klein, WOH, then there's usually information handy on those. I know on Twitter there's actually a link, I think, in my bio. And then otherwise, you can always reach me at either one of those, and I can get people the information.
Fantastic. Well, I want to wish you luck this weekend. On Friday, you're teaming up with Britt Baker and Vita Scott, take on Faye Jackson, Mandy Leone, and Crazy Mary Dobson. How does your undefeated streak play into a 6-women tag match? Is this still on the line?
Well, it's always on the line, and I maintained it when I was in the 4-way match with Kimberly, Taylor Hendricks, and Vita Scott. So these women better not drop the ball. I'm going to have to, I was actually thinking about that today, and I was like, I may have to kind of take charge in there and, make sure that everything goes correctly, because I can't really trust my future and my successes and my opportunities in the hands of anyone but me. So I was definitely thinking about how to make sure I can kind of take things into my own hands. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself, sort of thing. So
well said.
Have my eyes on those girls.
And also, we can catch you on Women of Honor weekly on Wednesdays. There are new videos posted on the Ring of Honor YouTube page. There is the fantastic Women of Honor VOD that's available on ringofhonorwrestling.com. Hopefully, we'll be seeing another one soon.
Yes.
And do you have any other shows that you want to talk to us about before we let you go?
No.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. No, just keep an eye on my Facebook and Twitter. As I mentioned, I am in school right now, so if you see that I'm going to be on an event near you, definitely take advantage, because it's going to be just a little bit more rare right now until I graduate. So if you see the opportunity, take it.
All right. Well, I just wanted to thank you very much for your time and for a pretty badass interview.
Thank you so much.